What happens when a local cop with a short fuse pulls over a woman who outranks him in every way that matters? Meet Major Celeste Harper, Army Reserve officer, Bronze Star recipient, and the last person Officer Brian Kessler expected to intimidate. One routine stop turned into a courtroom reckoning. Watch how calm power dismantles abuse. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that demand justice. It started on a Thursday night. Late, quiet, the kind of hour when the streets of Dayton, Ohio are nearly asleep. The clock read just past 11:30. Streetlights cast long shadows across empty intersections, the kind of calm only broken by the low hum of a passing engine or the flicker of a neon sign clinging to life in a diner window. The city had settled into its stillness, unaware that in the next few minutes, a seemingly routine traffic stop would ignite something far more profound. Major Celeste Harper had been driving north for almost 2 hours. The military coordination meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve had gone longer than expected, but Celeste never rushed. She was precise by nature, calculated, organized, the kind of leader who commanded respect not with volume, but with quiet certainty. Her black government-issued SUV moved smoothly through the night, clean and unmarked save for the faint reflection of her credentials tucked neatly inside the glove box. The windows were modestly tinted. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Just like her. At 42, Celeste had seen enough of the world to know that control is a fragile illusion. She'd served 2 tours in the Middle East. She'd run logistics for disaster relief in hurricane zones and trained hundreds of soldiers in operational coordination. She didn't scare easily. But experience had taught her to stay alert, especially in places where uniforms didn't always guarantee respect. Especially as a black woman in America. Especially late at night on a deserted stretch of road. She wasn't speeding. Her hands were steady. The lane markers slid by with measured rhythm. The radio was off. The only sound was the tires gliding over asphalt and the soft hum of her thoughts beginning to settle. She was less than 20 minutes from home when it happened. Blue and red lights flared in her rearview mirror. She blinked, instinctively checking her speed. 42 miles per hour in a 45. No weaving, no sudden turns, no stops missed. She tapped her signal and calmly pulled onto the shoulder. The lights stayed behind her, unwavering. Then came the telltale sound, the abrupt slam of a patrol car door and the crunch of boots on gravel. Officer Brian Kessler, 6 feet tall, stocky, and wound tight from the inside out. Kessler was in his 10th year on the Dayton force. Known for his no-nonsense attitude, he believed compliance wasn't earned. It was expected. Ask questions, and you became suspicious. Ask again, and you became a problem. His reputation among the force was mixed. Some admired his assertiveness, others avoided it. He liked to control a scene before it even started. He didn't approach from the passenger side. He came straight to the driver's window, flashlight raised like a warning. Celeste rolled the window halfway, both hands in plain sight on the steering wheel. "License and registration," Kessler said. No greeting, no explanation, just command. Celeste didn't flinch. Her voice was clear, steady. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" Kessler's flashlight beam shot across her face, pausing just long enough to register the sharp lines of discipline in her posture. "You were drifting," he said. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been drinking." Celeste's brow tightened just slightly. "I wasn't." "License and registration," he repeated, louder this time, with a hint of irritation curling the edge of his words. She didn't argue. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the glove box, retrieved her government credentials, and handed them over. "This is a federal vehicle," she said evenly. "I'm a federal employee." Kessler glanced at the ID, then smirked. "Military?" Yes. Well, he said, that doesn't mean you're above the law. I never said I was. His voice sharpened like a blade. Step out of the vehicle. Celeste blinked. Excuse me? I said step out of the car. I'm conducting a field sobriety test. There was no slur in her words, no glazed look in her eyes, no odor of alcohol. Yet here he was, escalating, as if her calmness threatened him, as if her dignity was defiance. She paused, calculating the risk, and then spoke, not with defiance, but precision. On what grounds? I've cooperated. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know the reason. His voice dropped to a growl. You're refusing a lawful order? I'm asking for an explanation. That was enough. He stepped forward, yanked the door open with a jolt, and barked, Out! Now! And that was when Celeste, still composed, reached for her phone and hit record. Just so we're clear, she said, her voice cool as steel. This conversation is being recorded. For a flicker of a second, hesitation passed over Kessler's face, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, but his pride was too loud for reason. He waved her out. She stepped out, standing tall. Civilian clothes, yes, but her bearing was unmistakable. Shoulders back, eyes forward, every move controlled. She didn't protest, didn't resist, but she didn't shrink either. Kessler made her walk a straight line under the wash of the streetlights, like she was some teenager leaving a college party. She followed every instruction flawlessly. No stagger, no delay, no complaint. Still, when it was over, he scribbled on his pad. Failure to maintain your lane, he said, tearing the ticket with a satisfying rip and holding it out like a dare. Celeste took the paper silently. No reaction, just a single look. A look that said, this wasn't over. And it wasn't. Kessler climbed back into his cruiser, logged the stop with the indifference of a man who'd done this 100 times. To him, this was just another driver, another check mark on a slow night, another woman who didn't move fast enough, didn't yield enough, didn't stay small enough. But what Kessler didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that this time, the person he tried to reduce was someone who had built her entire life on discipline, duty, and honor. Someone who outranked him not just in rank, but in someone who would not let silence be her shield, and by the time the footage surfaced and the courtroom doors opened, it would be too late for Officer Kessler to retreat. This was no longer about a traffic stop. This was the beginning of a reckoning. For Officer Brian Kessler, control was everything. It didn't matter if you were a teenager with too much bass in your speakers or a nurse driving home after a 12-hour shift. If he pulled you over, you followed his script. Quickly, quietly, without question. That was the unwritten rule in his corner of Dayton, Ohio. And if someone challenged that script, even slightly, he knew how to push harder, faster, louder. So when Major Celeste Harper asked him, calmly and directly, "May I ask why I was pulled over?" he didn't hear professionalism. He heard resistance. From the moment he stepped out of his cruiser and saw her behind the wheel of that government-issued SUV, his posture shifted. His boots hit the gravel with purpose. One hand rested on his belt, fingers grazing the holster like it was a reflex. The flashlight in his other hand wasn't just for visibility. It was part of the performance. He used it the way a lion uses its stare. A warning. He didn't bother with the usual script. "Good evening, ma'am." Or, "Do you know why I stopped you?" That was for citizens who already knew their place. Instead, it was straight to license and registration. Celeste's response was immediate, but not submissive. She kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, her voice calm and level. "Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flash her badge or throw around her rank. She simply asked a basic question, framed with clarity and respect. But for Kessler, who'd spent the last decade training his authority to override anyone else's, that question was a spark. He raised the flashlight, blinding her momentarily. "You were drifting," he snapped. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been drinking." No slur in her speech, no smell of alcohol, no signs of impairment. But none of that mattered to Kessler. He didn't need proof. He just needed a reason to escalate. "I wasn't drinking," she replied, the edge of her brow tightening. "License and registration," he said again, this time louder, as if volume could substitute for explanation. Celeste, unbothered, moved slowly and deliberately. She retrieved her credentials from the glove box, her military ID clearly displayed, and handed them through the window. "This is a federal vehicle," she said. "I'm a federal employee." Kessler scanned the ID, barely reading. "Military," he smirked. "That doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." But it didn't matter. Her composure, her refusal to cower or rush, it all read as insolence to him. He couldn't place it. But something about her rattled him. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch when he raised his voice. Maybe it was the way she held eye contact without trembling. Or maybe it was the realization, just faint enough to ignore, that she had more discipline in her silence than he had in his entire approach. And so he escalated. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, hand tightening near his sidearm. Celeste blinked. "Excuse me? I said step out of the car. I'm conducting a field sobriety test." There it was, his attempt to flip the scene, to assert total dominance under the guise of protocol. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in control. But Celeste wasn't new to pressure. She wasn't someone who needed to raise her voice to be heard. She'd led convoys through mortar fire. She'd managed supply lines in chaos. She knew how to keep her pulse, even when the world tilted sideways. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "On what grounds?" she asked. "I've cooperated. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know the reason." Kessler stepped closer, the distance between them thinning like a fuse. "Now you're refusing a lawful order?" he barked. "No," she replied, her voice like steel beneath silk. "I'm asking for an explanation." His ego couldn't take it. In one aggressive motion, he yanked the door open himself and spat out, "Out! Now!" That's when Celeste made a quiet decision that would change everything. Without a word, she picked up her phone, unlocked it, and tapped the camera. The screen lit up, and the recording began. "Just so we're clear," she said, her voice still even, "this conversation is being recorded." For the first time, Kessler hesitated. A flicker, barely visible, but there. His eyes flicked to the glowing screen in her hand, then back to her face. Somewhere deep in the base of his spine, instinct whispered, "You've lost control." But his pride was louder than his instinct. "Out!" he snapped again. Celeste stepped out of the SUV slowly, with purpose. She didn't argue. She didn't resist. But she didn't shrink. She stood upright, spine straight, shoulders back, her breathing steady. There was nothing in her posture that suggested defiance, only dignity. Even in civilian clothes, her authority radiated like heat. She didn't need to tell him who she was. She showed it in how she moved. Kessler made her perform the sobriety test, walk the line, heel to toe, under the halo of the street lamp. She did it perfectly. No hesitation, no imbalance, no slur, stumble, or sway. And all of it, every motion, every word, was captured on her phone. When it was over, he stood stiffly, reaching for his ticket pad like it was a sword. "Failure to maintain your lane," he said, scribbling the citation with a flourish. Celeste didn't respond. She didn't contest it. She took the paper with one hand, nodded once, and walked calmly back to her vehicle. No tears, no anger, just a silent promise in her eyes. This is not over. Kessler returned to his cruiser, dropped into the driver's seat, and stared at the dash. For a moment, the buzz of adrenaline faded, and something colder settled in. He didn't know what exactly he'd just triggered, but a whisper curled around the edge of his thoughts. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. He'd relied on his badge for so long, used it like armor, like proof of superiority. But tonight, it hadn't worked. Not against her. Not against that quiet, controlled woman who didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't fold. Major Celeste Harper wasn't the problem he thought she was. She was the reckoning he never saw coming. Under the yellow wash of the streetlights, Major Celeste Harper walked the narrow white line with the kind of precision that came not from fear, but from years of practiced control. Heel to toe, slow and steady. Back straight, arms relaxed at her sides. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. Not once. The air was cool and still, the road empty, and the only sound besides her deliberate footsteps was Officer Brian Kessler's breathing. Tight, measured, like a man forcing composure when it's slipping through his hands. He watched her with a narrowing gaze, jaw flexed, the flashlight lowered now but still clutched in his grip like a crutch. This wasn't going the way he expected. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She wasn't making mistakes he could pounce on. She was simply correct. Unshakably correct. Her balance was perfect. Her responses clear. Her demeanor calm. Even the camera in her hand, still quietly recording from the hood of her car, didn't waver. And that, more than anything, irritated him. Because in Kessler's world, there were two types of people, compliant and difficult. And she didn't fit neatly into either. She wasn't defiant, but she wouldn't submit. She wasn't disrespectful, but she refused to be diminished. He couldn't intimidate her, couldn't provoke her, couldn't bend her. And that left him with a feeling he didn't know how to handle. Irrelevant. When the test ended, Celeste returned to stand near her SUV, breathing evenly. Her phone still rolled quietly. She said nothing. Didn't ask for forgiveness or demand fairness. She simply waited. Kessler clicked his pen. He couldn't arrest her. Not legally. Not ethically. He had nothing. No alcohol. No erratic driving. No non-compliance. But still, he couldn't walk away empty-handed. Not after the way she looked at him. Not after the way she made him feel like the one on trial. He flipped open his citation book with a flourish, like it was a weapon. "Failure to maintain your lane," he said, writing with fast, deliberate strokes. Celeste didn't move. "Sign here," he added, tearing off the slip and holding it out with the same dismissive confidence he'd use handing a child detention. His voice took on a subtle, almost performative condescension, measured and patronizing. Celeste glanced at the ticket, then at him. She took it slowly, said nothing, and didn't sign. "You're not refusing to sign, are you?" he asked. "I'm acknowledging receipt," she replied. Kessler hesitated. For the briefest second, it struck him how sharp her language was. Not hostile, not dramatic, just exact. Like someone who dealt with this before. Like someone who knew the rules better than he did. "You're free to go," he muttered, stepping back. Celeste slid back into her SUV. The phone camera was still rolling. She adjusted the angle slightly to capture him walking away. She didn't need to speak. The footage said enough. Her calm, his aggression, her balance, his bias. Everything was there. Documented. The engine rumbled to life, and she pulled away slowly, her headlights sweeping across the dark stretch of road ahead. Kessler stood in his cruiser's headlights, alone in the middle of that silent street, holding a clipboard and a pen. The adrenaline that had surged when he first flipped on his lights had now burned off, leaving behind a cold, nagging void. He walked back to his vehicle, opened the door with more force than necessary, and slid into the driver's seat. He tossed the citation book onto the passenger seat and sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard. There was no win here. Not really. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't hostile. She was simply someone who knew her rights and refused to be rattled. And that, to Kessler, was threatening. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she had shown him exactly how limited his authority became when it was challenged by knowledge instead of fear. The body camera he wore, still powered on, still recording, had caught everything too. But he didn't think about that. Not yet. He plugged it into the dock at the station 2 hours later, the footage joining a sea of others no one ever really reviewed, unless a complaint was filed. And to Kessler, that night was over. Another stop. Another difficult driver. He didn't mention her name in his log. Just checked the boxes. Weaving within lane. Field sobriety conducted. No arrest. Nothing to see. But at the break room the next day, he couldn't resist telling the story. Had some woman try to pull rank on me last night, he told a fellow officer with a chuckle, sipping bad coffee. Flashed her government ID like I was supposed to salute her or something. What's her name? The other officer asked, half interested. Harper, Celeste Harper, he said. Major, apparently. The other officer, Sergeant Lena Cruz, froze mid-sip. Wait, Major Celeste Harper from Fort Greene? Kessler raised an eyebrow. You know her? She's a logistics commander. Bronze Star. One of the sharpest officers I've met. She spoke at the academy last year. You stopped her? Kessler shrugged. Didn't know who she was, didn't matter, but something about Cruz's expression stuck with him. A quiet shift. Not fear, not accusation, just respect. For Harper, not him. Kessler waved it off. She got a ticket like anyone else. Don't care what medals she's got. But a shadow had settled over him now, thin, quiet, but undeniable. Because deep down he knew she wasn't like anyone else. And he hadn't treated her like someone who had risked her life for the flag he wore on his sleeve. Still, he told himself it would pass. A ticket was a ticket. Who cared? But what he failed to understand, what his pride refused to let him see, was that Celeste didn't take that paper slip as a fine. She took it as a message that no matter how hard she'd worked, how much she'd earned, how many lives she'd protected, someone like Kessler could still try to reduce her to just another angry black woman on a dark road. And that was the mistake. Because Celeste wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to file. And the video, hers and his, would speak louder than any traffic ticket ever could. The stop might have ended that night, but the reckoning was just beginning. Officer Brian Kessler had worn his uniform for 12 years. 12 long years of night shifts, domestic calls, bar fights, and foot chases. He carried it all like a badge of pride. The stress, the scars, the stories. In his mind, he had paid his dues. He wasn't one of those soft recruits still learning how to hold the line. He was the line. That was the identity he'd built for himself, day by day, citation by citation. Not compassionate, not diplomatic, but effective. Respected, maybe. Feared, definitely. And for Kessler, that was enough. Within the walls of the precinct, he was known as a man who got things done. The younger officers stood a little straighter when he walked in. Some of the veterans avoided small talk with him altogether. He wasn't warm. He didn't do banter or birthdays. He clocked in early, clocked out late, and filled every space in between with a kind of relentless authority that dared anyone to question him. But behind closed doors, In locker rooms and break rooms, off the record, there were stories. Stories about how quickly he escalated situations, about traffic stops that turned confrontational for no reason, about how his hand lingered near his holster too often, his voice too sharp, his patience too short. Still, nothing ever stuck. Internal Affairs had opened 2 minor inquiries over the years, both quietly closed. The union had his back. The department was overstretched. Nobody wanted to cause a ripple, especially not over what they considered routine Kessler behavior. He knew how to work the system, and he knew that results often mattered more than reputation. So he kept his head down, kept pushing forward, and kept telling himself that he was what the streets needed. Firm hands, no excuses. But then came that Thursday night. That stop. Major Celeste Harper. At the time, she was just another driver in a dark SUV to him. Just another woman who didn't submit fast enough. Just another name to scribble on a citation. He hadn't asked her profession. Didn't care about her credentials. Didn't notice the calm authority in her tone or the measured way she moved. She wasn't shouting, so he ignored her. She wasn't crying, so he dismissed her. She wasn't drunk, but she wasn't docile either. And that, to Kessler, was enough to label her difficult. He gave her the ticket, drove away, and filed it without a second thought. To him, the matter was closed. But the next morning, with a half-empty coffee cup in one hand and a smug grin on his face, Kessler strolled into the precinct break room and recounted the story like it was a joke. "Had a lady last night," he began, leaning against the counter. "Government vehicle, real serious type. Pulled her over for drifting a bit, you know. She gets all clipped and formal, starts flashing her ID like it's supposed to impress me." Officer Davis glanced up from his paperwork. "Military?" "Yeah. Claimed she was federal something. Major Harper. Celeste, I think." The name floated in the air for a moment like a signal flare. Then from the other side of the room, Sergeant Lena Cruz lowered her coffee and turned toward him. "Wait, Celeste Harper?" she asked. Kessler chuckled, oblivious. "Yeah. You know her?" Cruz's expression tightened. "You stopped Major Celeste Harper?" He raised an eyebrow. "Apparently." "What? She royalty or something?" Cruz didn't laugh. "She's one of the highest-ranking officers at Fort Greene. Logistics commander. Bronze Star recipient. Coordinated national response during Hurricane Inez. I've heard her speak at 2 conferences. She's the real deal, Kessler. Not just some bureaucrat playing soldier." The room went still. Even Davis put down his pen. Kessler's smile faltered for the first time. "Well, she was drifting." Cruz narrowed her eyes. "So you ran a sobriety test on a decorated officer? Issued her a citation? Did you even check who she was before treating her like a suspect?" "I treated her like any other driver," he muttered. "That's the problem," Cruz shot back, her voice sharp. "She's not just any other driver. She's served longer than most people in this department. She's led troops through war zones. She's not going to let something like this slide." Kessler tried to wave it off. "So what? She's mad I didn't bow down? She'll cool off." But Cruz shook her head. "You don't get it. She's not loud, but she's deliberate. If she records it, reports it, she's doing it for a reason." For a brief moment, Kessler felt something unfamiliar creep into his chest. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was more like awareness, the beginning of understanding that maybe, just maybe, he'd picked the wrong target this time. He tried to steady himself. "She wasn't arrested. I didn't touch her. It's just a citation." Cruz's reply was quick. "Doesn't matter. It's how you handled it. How you talked to her. How you assumed." The silence that followed was heavy. Kessler left the break room soon after, but the echo of the conversation lingered. For the first time in a long while, the confidence in his stride was gone. He walked back to his desk and sat, staring at the corner of his screen where his body camera footage icon blinked. He hadn't even reviewed the video. Hadn't thought to. But now, a sliver of doubt crept in. He remembered how she stood so calmly, how she recorded everything without raising her voice, how she looked at him, not with fear, but with purpose, and he realized that her silence had never been compliance. It had been calculation, because behind the calm voice and unflinching gaze was a woman who had seen real danger, who had survived real chaos. She didn't panic because he didn't intimidate her, and he didn't intimidate her because, in her world, he wasn't the highest authority in the room. Behind the uniform he dismissed was someone who had spent decades serving a country that now had to decide whether it would serve her back. Someone who had more medals than he had commendations, more leadership training than he had field experience, and more integrity in her silence than he had in 1,000 reports. And now she had his words, his tone, his treatment, all on video. He didn't know it yet, but the shift had begun. The man who had built his power on unchecked control had finally met a force greater than fear. And her name was Major Celeste Harper. The morning after the stop, Major Celeste Harper sat alone in her office at Fort Greene, the sunlight cutting across her desk in sharp, silent angles. The base was already awake, boots on gravel, radios crackling, orders moving through the chain, but inside this quiet corner of the command building, Celeste wasn't giving orders. She wasn't reviewing supply routes or coordinating transportation logistics. She was still, focused. The hum of her computer, the quiet tick of the wall clock, those were the only sounds keeping her company. Her phone sat on the desk beside her. The video file open but paused at a frame that had etched itself into her memory. Officer Kessler's flashlight held high, his mouth mid-command, his posture rigid with tension. She had already watched it 3 times, each viewing colder than the last. Not because the footage surprised her, no, she had expected it, but because it confirmed just how calm she had been, and just how aggressive he had chosen to be. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely, the weight of her uniform suddenly heavier than usual. Her bronze star ribbon glinted softly under the office light. 2 deployments, 18 years of service, and more missions than she could count. And yet last night, none of that mattered. To Officer Kessler, she was just a black woman in an SUV after dark. Nothing more. She could still hear the echo of his voice. Step out of the car. Not a question. Not a request. A command delivered without reason, backed by the implied threat of force. She didn't tremble when he raised his tone. She didn't resist when he opened her door. She didn't flinch when he made her walk a line in front of empty streets. But now, in the quiet aftermath, she felt something heavier than anger pressing into her chest. Responsibility. Celeste had led units through war zones. She had made impossible calls under fire. But none of that prepared her for the particular ache of being devalued at home, in her own country, while serving it. And what haunted her more than anything was the thought of her soldiers, young, bright-eyed recruits, watching that video and learning the wrong lesson. That silence is safer. That dignity invites danger. That no matter your rank or record, the world might still see only your skin. She thought of Sergeant Tasha Lynn, a 26-year-old motor pool tech who had once confided in Celeste about being pulled over outside of base for driving suspiciously. The officer never gave a reason, just made her wait with the engine off and her hands on the dash for nearly 30 minutes. Tasha had said she was too afraid to report it, afraid it would make things worse. Celeste understood that fear. She'd learned long ago that survival in some spaces meant shrinking yourself just enough to stay unthreatening. Don't talk back. Don't look irritated. Don't move too fast. Don't move too slow. But that time had passed. Celeste had worked too hard, led too many, mentored too often to model silence now. She opened a blank document and began to type. Every detail of the stop. Time, location, sequence of commands. The tone in Kessler's voice. The way his hand never strayed far from his holster. The moment he pulled her door open without warning. The fact that she passed the field test, yet still received a citation. She attached her phone footage. Then she clicked through to the Military Legal Services portal and filed a formal complaint. Not with outrage, with precision. When her aide, Lieutenant Ramos, knocked and entered minutes later, she looked up but didn't pause her typing. "You good, ma'am?" he asked gently. Celeste nodded, her tone firm but quiet. "I'm handling it." Ramos hesitated, then stepped in and closed the door behind him. "I saw the video," he said. "You want me to notify the base lawyer?" She finished her sentence, saved the document, then turned. "Already done," he nodded slowly, sensing the tension beneath her composure. "Just say the word. We'll back you." "I know," she replied, "but this isn't about backup. It's about boundaries." She stood and walked to the window, watching a formation of new recruits march across the parade field in tight cadence. Uniforms crisp, eyes forward. Most of them would never know this moment. Most would never be pulled from a car, ordered to stand like a suspect after proving themselves 1,000 times over. But some would, and if she said nothing, they'd learn that proving yourself doesn't protect you. That silence is how you survive. That respect can be earned in combat, but not in a traffic stop. And that would be unacceptable. Her rank wasn't a shield. It was a platform, and she intended to use it. By noon, the complaint was in the hands of the Fort Greene legal team. The Inspector General's office had been notified. The video was backed up on 3 devices, including her work computer. A file folder marked Harper vs. Kessler had begun taking shape, and Celeste, who had faced gunfire in desert terrain and led recovery operations after natural disasters, was preparing for a different kind of war. Not with weapons, but with words, evidence, and unshakable conviction. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't need the media or a press release. She had the truth. And the truth was often louder than outrage, more cutting than protest. The truth had its own rhythm, and she was going to let it play. As the afternoon sun angled westward across her desk, Celeste picked up her phone again. She watched the footage one more time, not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted to memorize what power looked like when it went unchecked, and what courage looked like when it didn't yield. She turned the screen off, closed the folder, and sat back in her chair. One stop, one voice, one file. But it was a beginning. Not for revenge, not for attention. For accountability. Because if no one else was going to draw the line, she would. And this time, it wouldn't be one she had to walk to prove her worth. 3 days after Major Celeste Harper filed her complaint, Officer Brian Kessler stood in the parking lot behind the precinct, one hand gripping a plastic coffee cup, the other tearing open a plain manila envelope with his name typed across the front. No seal, no warning, just that bland, bureaucratic stillness that always felt harmless. Until it wasn't. The contents inside weren't a memo. They weren't a schedule change or an overtime slip. They were legal documents, court-stamped and clipped together with surgical precision. A civil rights complaint. Harper vs. Kessler. Kessler blinked at the top line. Plaintiff. Major Celeste Harper. Allegations. Unlawful detainment, intimidation, abuse of authority under color of law. For a moment, he just stood there, paper in hand, brain catching up to the words. Then he laughed. A short, sharp bark of disbelief that didn't even sound like him. "No way," he muttered. "No way this holds." But the words looked back at him like a mirror. Cold, clear, unblinking. When he walked back into the building, everything felt different. He tried to act the same, broad shoulders, head high, but something had shifted. The air had changed. It was subtle at first, a few conversations that stopped when he entered the room, a couple of glances that lingered too long in the hallway. One officer nodded at him too quickly. Another didn't meet his eyes at all. Inside his commander's office, the blinds were drawn. The door clicked shut behind him. Lieutenant Commander Ray Middleton sat behind his desk, hands clasped in front of him, a thin folder open but untouched. His expression was unreadable. "We need to talk," Middleton said. Kessler dropped into the chair like a man preparing for a scolding, not a reckoning. "About the woman from the other night," Middleton continued. Kessler rolled his eyes. "She's acting like a victim. She got pulled over and didn't like it. Big deal." Middleton didn't smile. "She's not pretending. Do you even know who she is?" "I don't care who she is," Kessler snapped. "She got stopped, acted smart, and now she's upset I didn't roll out the red carpet." Middleton leaned forward, voice firm. "She's Major Celeste Harper, active duty logistics commander, Bronze Star recipient. She's worked with the National Guard, FEMA, and Homeland Security. She's testified before Congress, for God's sake. She has influence, and she has the entire stop recorded, from her phone and your body cam." Kessler's jaw tightened. Middleton went on. "The footage shows her being calm, compliant. You ordering her out of the vehicle without proper cause. Your tone was aggressive. Your hand was near your weapon the whole time. She didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. You escalated for no reason. That's a problem." Kessler scoffed. "What? We're apologizing now because she's military?" "No," Middleton said. "We're not apologizing because she's military. We're responding because we don't ignore this kind of complaint anymore. Internal Affairs has already started their review, and if this case goes public, which it will, it won't just be about you. It'll be about this department." Kessler sat back, folding his arms, but the arrogance was slipping. For once, he had no sarcastic reply, no defensive smirk. Just the rustle of the paper in his lap, the one with his name on it, next to the word defendant. Outside the commander's office, the rumors were already circling like vultures. In the locker room, whispers moved between benches. "You hear who he stopped? She's suing? You seen the footage yet?" Even the rookies sensed it. Something was unraveling. And for the first time, Kessler wasn't the one people feared. He was the one they were watching. In the past, his reputation had been armor. He was the guy who handled things, the guy who took control. But now, that armor was cracking, and everyone could see the fault lines. He logged into the internal system later that afternoon, trying to pretend like it was any other shift. But the screen blinked back a notice he hadn't seen before. Officer under administrative review. Body cam footage restricted for legal proceedings. He clicked. Access denied. The chill was immediate. He walked through the halls with that same clipped pace he'd always had. But it didn't land the same anymore. People didn't get out of his way. They didn't ask him for advice. And no one mentioned his name in the same tone they used to. Not with deference. Now it was caution. He found himself replaying the stop in his mind, searching for where it had turned. The question she asked? The moment she started recording? The line she walked without fault? He couldn't even pinpoint when he lost control, but he felt it, even now. That slow, humiliating shift from authority to exposure. Meanwhile, at Fort Greene, Celeste didn't speak to the press. She didn't post anything online. She wasn't out for spectacle. But the legal gears were already in motion. The Inspector General had opened an inquiry. Her lawyer had begun collecting procedural documentation. And the footage, both hers and his, had been synchronized into a single timeline, creating a crystal-clear record of every second, every word, every step. The civil rights complaint wasn't just paper. It was momentum. And for Kessler, that momentum was closing in. His fellow officers no longer laughed in the break room when he walked in. They didn't joke about just another traffic stop. They looked at him like a man walking into a storm he didn't know how to weather, like someone who had spent 12 years building power by volume, only to be undone by a woman who never raised her voice. And the worst part? She hadn't even spoken publicly. Not yet, but the silence was deafening. What once made Kessler feel invincible, the badge, the uniform, the unwritten authority, was now the very thing dragging him into the spotlight. The complaint had cracked open a door. Now the question wasn't just what happened that night. It was how many other nights have looked just like it. For the first time in his career, Officer Brian Kessler wasn't just under review. He was being seen, and the system that had always looked the other way was finally starting to look back. The courtroom was quiet the morning Major Celeste Harper walked in. Not tense, just still, like a held breath. It wasn't packed with reporters or news cameras. Not yet. But the room was filled with people who understood what was at stake, even if they didn't say it out loud. There were military officers from Fort Greene sitting in the back row in their pressed dress blues, their presence deliberate but silent. A few members of the Dayton Police Department were there too, plain clothes, arms folded, eyes alert. And in between them, ordinary citizens filled the wooden benches, unsure if they were about to witness a traffic stop trial or something far more defining. Then Celeste entered, and the tone of the room shifted. She wore her full Army service uniform, every medal aligned with precision, her rank crisp on her shoulders, her bronze star ribbon anchored high on her chest. It wasn't for effect. It wasn't a performance. It was a statement of truth. This was who she was, always had been, not just that night on the side of the road, but every day before and since. She didn't wear the uniform to intimidate. She wore it so the jury would see the full picture. Not just a woman behind the wheel of a government SUV, but a commander, a decorated veteran, a leader who had earned everything that was now being called into question by a man who saw none of it. Officer Brian Kessler was already seated when she walked in. He looked up, and his face tensed. His usual smirk, that defensive mask he wore so well, faltered. He saw the medals, the posture, the calm authority. And for the first time, something in him visibly cracked. Celeste didn't acknowledge him. She walked straight to the plaintiff's table, her lawyer, Delaney Price, already waiting. Delaney gave her a small nod. Celeste returned it with the quiet composure of someone who had faced worse things in combat zones, yet understood that this battle was just as important. The judge entered. The court stood. Proceedings began. The trial moved swiftly. The courtroom hushed except for the sounds of shuffling paper and the judge's clear voice cutting through the stillness. But everything changed when Celeste took the stand. She didn't rush, didn't fidget. She straightened her collar, adjusted the microphone, and sat tall. Her oath was spoken with a steady tone, firm, confident, grounded. "Major Harper," Delaney began, rising from her chair, "can you walk us through the night of the incident?" Celeste nodded once. On the evening of January 12th, at approximately 11:32 p.m., I was driving north on Route 19 after attending a coordination meeting with the Indiana Guard Reserve. I was in a federal vehicle, a black SUV. I was not speeding. I had not been drinking. I was following all traffic laws. Her voice was even, measured like a cadence in formation. I was pulled over by Officer Kessler. When I asked why, he stated I had been drifting and looked like I might have been drinking. I told him I had not. I complied with every request. I gave my ID. I moved slowly. I kept my hands visible at all times. Delaney paced gently. Did Officer Kessler explain why he was conducting a sobriety test? No, Celeste replied. He simply ordered me out of the vehicle. When I asked for clarification, he raised his voice. Then he opened the door himself. Did you resist? No. Did you argue? No. I recorded the encounter for my safety. There was no anger in her voice, no attempt to perform for the jury. Just the facts, laid bare. Simple. Devastating. Then Delaney stepped back. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit A, Major Harper's phone recording. The judge nodded, admitted. The video played. In the footage, the courtroom watched Celeste's phone perspective. The flashlight in her face, the raised voice, the sharp orders, the door being opened without cause. Her voice, steady. His, rising with tension. Her hands visible. His posture, aggressive. Her words, respectful. His, clipped and accusatory. Then came the second video. Kessler's body cam. From his perspective, everything became clearer. The way he loomed near her door, the way his hand hovered near his weapon, the fact that she never wavered in her composure, that she passed the sobriety test with perfect form, and that even after all of it, he still handed her a citation. When the lights came back on, no one in the room said a word. But the change was tangible. You could feel it. The air had shifted again, this time toward clarity. The jury, a mix of races and ages, sat a little straighter. Several of them glanced at each other. Others stared at Kessler, who kept his gaze locked on the table in front of him. Delaney returned to the center. Major Harper, why did you choose to record the stop? Celeste met her gaze. Because I've seen what happens when people don't. Did you file this complaint for personal gain? No, I filed it for accountability. Her words echoed through the room. A quiet blow that landed harder than any raised voice ever could. Kessler never took the stand. His lawyer, clearly tense, tried to recover. Officer Kessler was performing his duty. He responded to perceived impairment. Standard protocol. But the jury had already seen the footage. They had already heard Celeste speak. No amount of legal maneuvering could scrub away the tone in Kessler's voice. No justifications could erase the calm professionalism of the woman on that roadside who followed every rule, only to be treated like a threat. And when court adjourned for the day, Celeste didn't linger. She stepped down from the stand with the same grace she'd walked in with. No nods for attention. No words for the cameras now stationed at the building's edge. Just a quiet return to her seat. Her uniform still pristine, her presence still commanding. The jury didn't whisper. They didn't look around for direction. They already knew. This wasn't about a traffic ticket. It was about how power moves when it thinks no one is watching. And what happens when the wrong person gets watched back. 3 days after testimony ended, the courthouse was quieter than it had been all week. The press had thinned. The uniformed observers from Fort Greene and the Dayton Police Department had dwindled to a handful. No cameras flashed, no reporters called out names from the steps. But inside the courtroom, beneath the hum of overhead lights and the faint shuffle of papers, a different kind of tension held steady. The kind that comes before a verdict, before the truth is given official weight. Major Celeste Harper sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, hands folded in her lap, uniform pressed to perfection. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance around. She had spent her entire life preparing for high-stakes moments. But this was different. In war zones, clarity often arrived in seconds, in sound, in chaos, in instinct. But here, in this courtroom, justice moved slowly, carefully, with deliberation and doubt. And yet, it was still a battle, one that demanded just as much discipline. Across from her, Officer Brian Kessler sat with his lawyer, Charles Mathers, who whispered into his ear every few minutes, though Kessler barely reacted. His jaw was set, his gaze low. He wore a gray suit today, not a uniform, but the badge still clung to him like a shadow, less a symbol of honor now, and more a weight. Whatever swagger he'd carried before was gone. The courtroom had stripped it from him, piece by piece, first by Celeste's words, then by the recordings, and now by the public stillness of consequence. Judge Helen Marks entered the room. Her robe swayed slightly as she took her seat, adjusting her glasses and scanning the room with a practiced neutrality. Then she nodded toward the clerk. Has the jury reached a verdict? A woman on the front row stood, a slim white envelope in hand. We have, Your Honor. The envelope was passed, opened, read. In the matter of Harper vs. Kessler, Judge Marks began, her voice calm and deliberate. The jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. There was no outburst, no applause, just that sharp, breathless silence, the kind that comes when something heavy, something real, lands and cannot be moved. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't exhale. She only nodded once, more to herself than to anyone else. The judge continued. The court rules that Officer Brian Kessler, acting under color of law, did unlawfully detain and intimidate Major Celeste Harper during a traffic stop on January 12th. His actions were found to violate both departmental conduct codes and the plaintiff's constitutional rights. Kessler's head remained down. His lawyer shifted in his seat but said nothing. As part of this ruling, Judge Marks went on, Officer Kessler is ordered to pay $35,000 in civil damages. The incident will be entered into public record and forwarded to the Dayton Police Department's Office of Internal Review and the Department of Justice for further evaluation and policy consideration. The gavel struck once. Just like that, it was done. For some, it may have seemed like a modest verdict. No jail time, no front-page headlines screaming for change. But for Celeste, it was exactly what was needed. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just a line drawn in ink and law that said, this happened, and it was wrong. The courtroom emptied slowly. A few reporters drifted back in from the hallway, too late to catch the moment but eager to scribble details. Celeste exited without comment. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, remained behind to finalize paperwork. Kessler stood outside on the courthouse steps 15 minutes later, a folder clutched against his chest, his tie askew, face half-turned to avoid the waiting cameras. There were only 2 reporters now, both local. One asked, Officer Kessler, any response to the verdict? But he said nothing. He moved down the steps quickly and disappeared into the front seat of an unmarked car, head bowed. Later that evening, the official statement came from the Dayton Police Department. Officer Brian Kessler has been placed on unpaid administrative suspension pending a full internal review of the January 12th traffic stop involving Major Celeste Harper. The department is cooperating with federal oversight agencies and will implement recommendations based on the court ruling. Inside the department, the ripple effect was instant. The invincible aura Kessler once wore like armor cracked in every hallway. The rookies, who once stiffened when he entered, now walked past without acknowledgement. The jokes he used to tell, about putting people in line, about teaching drivers a lesson, stopped being funny. Officers who once covered for his temper now avoided him altogether. In the locker room, no one spoke to him. In briefings, no one asked his opinion. He wasn't feared anymore. He was watched. He wasn't a leader anymore. He was a liability. And the file with his name on it, the one with the complaint, the ruling, the footage, sat on his captain's desk under a red tab labeled Policy Implication. Back at Fort Greene, Celeste returned to her duties with the same quiet excellence she always carried. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't gather her team for a speech. But word spread anyway. Soldiers whispered that she had won, that she had stood up and not just survived, but prevailed. In the eyes of her staff, she hadn't just defended herself. She had defended every soldier who had ever been told to keep their head down and let injustice pass. Her inbox filled with quiet messages. "Ma'am, thank you for what you did. I saw the footage. You stayed so calm. I don't know if I could have. You made us proud." And still, Celeste didn't revel in any of it. She didn't seek the spotlight. She went back to coordinating transport schedules and reviewing deployment checklists as though nothing had changed. But something had. Her silence now had weight. Her calm now had context. People understood that strength didn't always look like a raised fist. Sometimes it looked like restraint, like clarity, like standing still while someone tried to shake your dignity loose and not moving an inch. The court ruling hadn't solved everything. It hadn't healed the larger system, but it carved something into the record that no one could erase. Celeste Harper had been wronged, and the system, slowly, imperfectly, had admitted it. That alone was power. That alone was progress. And for Officer Brian Kessler, who once believed control was his by default, the message was clear. That kind of power doesn't last. 2 months after the verdict, the snow had melted off the Fort Greene drill fields, and spring crept in quietly, just like she always did, without asking for applause. Inside the east wing of the base, where a fresh class of recruits gathered for their final week of leadership orientation, Major Celeste Harper stood at the front of a wide, echoing training hall. The walls behind her were lined with flags, photos of commanders, and plaques commemorating those who had served before. The air smelled faintly of starch, discipline, and anticipation. The cadets were seated in rows, young faces filled with energy and formality. Some had only been in uniform for a few weeks. Others had just passed their physical readiness evaluations and walked with the stiff pride of people learning how to carry weight with purpose. They expected to be taught about logistics. They expected her to speak about movement strategy, convoy discipline, or maybe disaster deployment protocol. She did none of that. Celeste stood in front of them in her duty uniform, not the dress blues from the courtroom, but the functional gear of someone ready to work. Her boots were clean but worn. Her sleeves were neatly rolled. Her voice, when she finally began, was low and sure. "I'm not here to talk to you about movement formations or emergency response procedures," she said. "You'll learn that soon enough. I'm here to talk about something more important. What it means to lead when no one's watching. What it means to wear this uniform when it doesn't protect you. What it means when authority is tested, not by battle, but by bias." The room was quiet, not the strained silence of confusion, but the lean-in silence of attention. The kind that says, "We didn't expect this, but we're listening." Celeste paced slowly in front of them, not for effect, but to hold the room gently in her rhythm. Her voice never rose above conversation, yet it held the weight of someone who'd lived everything she was about to say. "I want to ask you something," she continued. "How many of you believe a uniform automatically earns you respect?" A few hands rose, hesitant at first, then a few more, some certain, some unsure. Celeste nodded slowly. "I get why you'd think that. You've worked hard. You've passed tests. You've been told that this cloth makes you part of something bigger. And that's true. But here's the reality. Respect isn't granted by fabric. It's earned by action. Power isn't control. It's accountability. And leadership, real leadership, is what you do when you're challenged, not when you're obeyed." The words hung in the air like a flare in the night. She could see it in their faces. They knew she was speaking from experience. They'd heard things, whispers around the base, stories from the courtroom, rumors passed down about the officer who sued a cop and won without shouting once. Celeste paused, then leaned against the edge of the podium. 2 months ago, I was pulled over while driving home from a federal coordination meeting. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't drinking. I was in uniform, in a government vehicle with my ID on the dash. She watched their eyes. I was treated like a threat. No explanation, no courtesy, just commands. I didn't scream. I didn't resist. I asked questions, and I recorded everything. Later, I filed a complaint. I went to court, and I told the truth. She let the quiet settle again. That officer didn't see a soldier. He didn't see a leader. He didn't even see a human being worth speaking to with decency. He saw someone who didn't obey fast enough. Someone who didn't look the way he thought respect should look. One of the cadets in the back swallowed hard. Celeste continued gently. I'm telling you this because the badge, the rank, the uniform, you may wear them proudly, and you should. But they don't make you invincible, and they definitely don't make you right. Leadership means understanding that power is not a weapon. It's a burden. If you can't carry it with honor, you shouldn't carry it at all. She stepped forward again, scanning the room. I didn't take that officer to court to ruin his life. I did it because silence teaches permission. And I wasn't going to teach that lesson to the next soldier who looked like me. Especially not to the women. Especially not to the black cadets. Especially not to the ones who are watching how we carry ourselves and deciding who they'll become based on what we allow. Celeste let her hand rest on the edge of the lectern now, still and steady. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to rage to fight. Sometimes, the loudest resistance is the kind that never raises its voice. Sometimes, courage looks like standing your ground without stepping forward. And sometimes, the best way to show you were wronged is to simply not break. The recruits sat straighter. No one shuffled in their chair. No one whispered. No one dared look away. This wasn't a motivational speech. It was a blueprint. A lesson in what integrity sounds like when it's earned, not assigned. You're going to wear this uniform in cities that don't know your name, she said finally. You're going to be given orders. You'll be trusted with authority. And one day, maybe sooner than you think, you'll be tested. Not in combat, but in character. Her voice softened. When that day comes, remember this. Power given without conscience is dangerous. Power used with humility can change lives. She stepped away from the podium. There was no applause. Not because it wasn't deserved, but because the room wasn't filled with an audience. It was filled with witnesses. She didn't ask them to thank her. She didn't ask for admiration. She gave them a warning and a gift. That truth, spoken calmly, could be louder than any siren. That silence, when used with purpose, could be stronger than any command. And that leadership, when lived the right way, didn't need to shout to shake the ground. As Celeste Harper walked out of the training hall, the cadets remained seated, the echo of her voice still lingering behind her. Not as noise, but as guidance. And that was enough. What can American citizens learn from what happened between Major Celeste Harper and Officer Brian Kessler? More than you might think. This wasn't just a story about a traffic stop gone wrong. It was a lesson about what power looks like when it's unchecked, and what leadership looks like when it refuses to back down. Celeste never raised her voice. She didn't threaten, argue, or retaliate. She simply stood her ground with truth and discipline. And that was enough to shake the system. For every citizen watching, the lesson is clear. Authority is not the same as accountability. We must stop confusing uniforms with justice and badges with moral superiority. If someone who has served for over 18 years, someone who has worn the flag into combat, earned a Bronze Star, and led with integrity, can be treated like a threat during a simple roadside stop, what does that mean for the rest of us? It means silence is no longer an option. It means documenting injustice matters. It means speaking up, even calmly, can lead to real, lasting change. Celeste's case didn't just end with a fine or a ruling. It forced a conversation. It broke the illusion that compliance alone guarantees safety. And most importantly, it reminded us that you don't need to shout to stand strong. If you're an American watching this, ask yourself, when you see injustice, do you stay quiet? Do you look away? Or do you use your voice, your platform, your presence to hold people accountable? We all have a role in shaping the culture we live in. This story proves that integrity beats intimidation, that calm courage can dismantle systemic harm, and that leadership, in its truest form, is not about commanding others. It's about knowing when to stand up for what's right, even when no one claps for you. So if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think twice about how power operates in everyday life, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories that demand attention. Like the video if you believe in truth over fear. And most of all, share this story with your friends, your community, and your country. Because the next time someone like Celeste is stopped, maybe they'll have just a little more protection. Not from the law, but from us, from awareness, from change, from you.